The chamber was tense, the air heavy with unspoken rivalries. Then it came, Stephen Miller's voice, sharp, insistent, cutting across the room like a jagged blade. He didn't wait. He didn't listen. He didn't care. One interruption. Then another. And another. By the sixth time, it was no longer a debate, it was an ambush. 6 calculated attempts to smother Jasmine Crockett's words before they could breathe. 6 moments where arrogance thought it could drown out dignity. But Jasmine sat there, eyes locked, posture steady. The interruptions weren't rattling her, they were sharpening her. Each dismissive wave of Miller's voice was fuel, piling higher, preparing for ignition. Around her, the room stirred. Some leaned forward, others rolled their eyes, but everyone felt it, something was building. The camera of history loves silence just before the storm. And here it was. Crockett hadn't even spoken her final word, but the weight of it hovered like thunder about to break. Miller believed he had control, that his interruptions were winning him ground. But the truth was more dangerous than he realized. Every time he tried to shut her down, he only set the stage for her rise. 6 times. 6 moments that revealed everything about him and everything about her. His arrogance, her patience. His bluster, her composure. And then, as he opened his mouth for the 7th, the chamber seemed to lean in. What could possibly follow 6 failed attempts to silence a woman who refused to bend? The world was watching. Cameras rolled, feeds streamed, millions of eyes waiting for what would happen when arrogance met immovable dignity. And in that moment, Crockett didn't just prepare to answer Miller, she prepared to define herself. Because the 7th time wouldn't be like the others. This was no ordinary reply. It was the line that would freeze Miller mid-breath, the line that would travel across timelines and headlines, the line that would remind the world that calm courage always outlasts rage. 6 interruptions. But the 7th? That was the one no one saw coming. And when it landed, it wouldn't just shut down a man, it would ignite a movement. The Senate chamber is not just another room. It is the arena where laws are weighed, where voices echo into history, where the future of a nation is carved one word at a time. Every seat, every microphone, every exchange matters, because here, silence is never neutral. To be heard is to exist. To be silenced is to be erased. That is why Stephen Miller's interruptions carried more than noise. They were not simply outbursts of impatience or rudeness, they were an act of domination. 6 times, he cut Jasmine Crockett short. 6 times, he tried to drag her voice under the current of his own. To some, it may have looked like ordinary political sparring. But to those watching closely, it was symbolic. This was not just one man against one woman. It was the weight of power trying to muzzle the truth. Crockett knew what was at stake. She wasn't just speaking for herself, she was speaking for every American who has ever been talked over, dismissed, or silenced because they dared to challenge authority. For every woman told to sit down. For every black voice told to wait its turn. For every immigrant told they didn't belong. And that's why the interruptions mattered. Because when one powerful figure uses his platform to drown out another, it is not just noise, it is an assault on representation itself. The chamber grew restless. Some shifted uncomfortably, knowing the optics were terrible, a white political insider, seasoned in the machinery of power, aggressively trying to muzzle a rising black congresswoman. Others, perhaps, reveled in it, thinking Miller's brashness showed strength. But the truth was clear, he wasn't building dominance, he was exposing weakness. Only fragile ideas need to shout. Only brittle arguments rely on interruption. And Jasmine Crockett, steady and unshaken, embodied the opposite. Her patience was not passivity, it was strategy. Every time Miller cut her off, the contrast sharpened. His voice rose. Hers waited. His composure cracked. Hers solidified. It was a duel, yes, but it was also a mirror. And the longer it went on, the clearer the reflection became. What Miller underestimated was how America has changed. Once upon a time, interruptions like his might have gone unnoticed, brushed aside as normal politics. But not now. Not in an era where marginalized voices refuse to fade into the background. Not when millions are watching, ready to amplify every moment of resistance with a click, a share, a repost. This wasn't just a hearing anymore. It was a broadcast. A test. A trial by fire with democracy itself as the witness. And everyone could see who was truly losing ground. Because the story of that day wasn't written in Miller's interruptions. It was written in what those interruptions revealed, the desperation of old power clinging to control, and the resilience of new power refusing to be erased. But here's the thing about arrogance, it never knows when to stop. Miller believed his voice could smother Crockett's. He believed his status could insulate him from backlash. He believed that sheer force could substitute for truth. He was wrong. Because the chamber was about to witness not just a clash of personalities, but a lesson in history: when arrogance keeps pushing, it digs its own grave. And Miller? He wasn't done pushing. But Stephen Miller wasn't done, and his arrogance would only dig his own grave. To understand why Stephen Miller's interruptions mattered that day, you have to know who he is, and what he has built his career on. Because Miller wasn't some random political operative losing his temper in the heat of debate. He was the architect of a political machine built on silencing, excluding, and erasing. His presence in that Senate chamber was not incidental, it was symbolic. Stephen Miller has always thrived in the shadows of power, pulling strings while others stood in front of the cameras. He first rose to prominence as a hardline aide in the Trump administration, shaping some of the most controversial and divisive policies in modern American history. Zero-tolerance family separations at the border? Miller's blueprint. The Muslim travel ban that stranded families at airports worldwide? Miller's handiwork. The harshest refugee caps in decades? His fingerprints were everywhere. This wasn't a man guided by nuance or empathy. He was known for bulldozing conversations, reducing complex human struggles into political soundbites, and relishing the chaos it created. Colleagues described him as coldly strategic, a true believer in the politics of exclusion, someone who preferred blunt force over compromise. If there was a lever of power that could restrict, limit, or control, Miller wanted his hand on it. And with that reputation came a certain arrogance. He was the man behind the curtain, shaping narratives, scripting the talking points, orchestrating the outrage. He didn't just interrupt conversations, he engineered them. He knew the power of words weaponized, and he wielded them like a hammer. To Miller, domination wasn't just a tactic. It was the endgame. So when he leaned into that microphone, slicing into Jasmine Crockett's testimony again and again, he wasn't just being rude. He was replaying his lifelong pattern: silence the opponent, seize control of the narrative, force the room to bend to his cadence. 6 interruptions weren't accidents, they were the very essence of Stephen Miller. But here's the twist. For all his bravado, Miller had never truly faced someone like Jasmine Crockett. She wasn't just another opponent in a carefully managed media landscape. She wasn't a nameless bureaucrat who would bow to his dominance or a nervous appointee caught off guard by his theatrics. Crockett was a black woman who had carved her own path in the storm of American politics, a voice forged in the fires of resistance and resilience. And that made his behavior not only arrogant, but deeply hypocritical. Here was a man whose entire career had been about gatekeeping America, lecturing others about patriotism and dignity, yet in that chamber, his actions betrayed a fear he couldn't mask. He wasn't defending truth, he was terrified of it. He wasn't protecting democracy, he was suffocating it. And for anyone watching, the hypocrisy stung. Because when Stephen Miller interrupted Jasmine Crockett, millions of Americans saw more than a political exchange. They saw every boardroom where women are cut off mid-sentence. They saw every classroom where students of color are told to stay quiet. They saw every debate where the truth is sidelined by arrogance. His voice carried all of that history, whether he admitted it or not. And Crockett's silence, her calm, deliberate patience, was the perfect foil. While Miller swung wildly, trying to command the air, Crockett understood something he never did: true power doesn't need to shout. True strength doesn't need to bulldoze. Sometimes, the sharpest blade is restraint, letting your opponent expose themselves. The chamber itself seemed to lean into that contrast. Miller's interruptions grew louder, more desperate, but Crockett's composure turned them into his own undoing. Like watching a storm crash against a stone wall, each wave of arrogance made her steadiness stand taller. And this is where the outrage deepened for the audience. Because Miller's hypocrisy wasn't just about political contradictions, it was about the moral rot at the heart of his method. He claimed to defend American values, yet he disrespected the very foundation of democracy, the right to be heard. He projected strength, but his actions revealed fragility. He wanted to appear in control, but every outburst betrayed insecurity. And yet, he thought this moment would be just another victory lap. What Miller didn't realize was that he had walked into a fight he could not win, not because the odds were stacked against him, but because history itself was shifting under his feet. The old tactics of silencing and shouting down no longer carried the same weight. And Jasmine Crockett was about to prove it. To understand what happened in that chamber, you can't just focus on Stephen Miller's arrogance, you have to know the woman who sat across from him. Jasmine Crockett didn't arrive in Congress by accident. Her presence in that seat was the culmination of years of grit, sacrifice, and a refusal to bow to the forces that told her she didn't belong. Born in St. Louis, raised with working-class roots, Crockett's story was never one of privilege. It was one of persistence. She grew up seeing firsthand how inequality wasn't an abstract idea, it was a daily reality. She witnessed neighbors struggle to keep roofs over their heads, classmates wrestle with an unfair education system, and communities repeatedly told to wait for justice that never came. These early experiences didn't harden her heart, they sharpened her sense of purpose. Education became her weapon. She pursued it with the understanding that knowledge was not only power but also defense against those who would talk over you, dismiss you, or deny your place at the table. She went on to study law, not because it was an easy path, but because it was the battlefield where she knew voices like hers were needed most. As an attorney, Crockett quickly built a reputation for defending the marginalized. She didn't pick cases that would make her popular, she picked cases that mattered. Standing up for those who couldn't stand alone, she became known as a fighter unafraid of messy battles. And it wasn't just about courtroom victories, it was about principle. She believed in showing up, in staring down injustice with unflinching resolve, even when it meant taking on powerful adversaries. That same energy followed her into politics. When Crockett ran for office, she wasn't backed by vast political machines or deep-pocketed donors. She ran on authenticity, on the conviction that people deserved a representative who didn't just speak for them, but spoke like them, with the same fire they carried in their own struggles. In her campaigns, voters didn't just see a candidate, they saw a reflection of resilience. By the time she entered Congress, Crockett had already earned a reputation as sharp, fearless, and relentless. She became a standout presence in hearings and debates, not because she shouted the loudest, but because she wielded her words like precision instruments. Where others stumbled through prepared talking points, she cut straight to the heart of hypocrisy. Where opponents tried to rattle her, she responded with wit so quick and incisive it often left them scrambling. But here's what set her apart most: her calm strength. Crockett understood that power wasn't always about volume or theatrics. True power was preparation, walking into a room knowing that you had receipts, knowing that your arguments stood on bedrock, knowing that the truth was on your side. And when she sat in that chamber, facing Stephen Miller's interruptions, she wasn't scrambling for comebacks. She was waiting, calmly, patiently, because she already knew where this was headed. That composure is what made her such a formidable presence. Many politicians react in the heat of the moment, raising their voices, losing their footing, letting frustration cloud their words. Crockett was different. Every interruption from Miller wasn't a disruption, it was fuel. Every attempt to silence her only made her next words sharper, clearer, stronger. And for her supporters, this was more than political theater. It was representation in its purest form. Here was a black woman, descended from generations who had been told to sit down and stay quiet, holding her ground in one of the most powerful rooms in the nation. Every time she refused to be rattled, it sent a signal beyond the chamber walls: we are still here, and we are not going anywhere. Her life had prepared her for this exact kind of moment. The courtroom battles, the campaign fights, the endless encounters with dismissive colleagues and hostile critics, all of it had been training for this. Crockett wasn't just surviving Miller's arrogance. She was outplaying it. She had faced men like him her entire career, men who mistook aggression for strength, men who confused intimidation with intellect. She had learned that the way to beat them wasn't to mimic their noise, it was to expose their emptiness. And that's exactly what was happening in that chamber. Each time Miller interrupted, Crockett held steady. Each time he tried to dominate, she absorbed it like a boxer waiting for the perfect counterpunch. She wasn't flustered. She wasn't intimidated. She was patient. Because Crockett knew something Miller didn't: arrogance always leaves an opening, and patience is the blade that finds it. For those watching, her presence became more than just inspiring, it was validating. They saw themselves in her, the student dismissed in class, the worker ignored in a meeting, the community brushed aside by power brokers. Crockett wasn't just answering Miller, she was answering a history of silencing. And every word she prepared to deliver carried the weight of that history. What Miller didn't realize, the moment seemed to whisper, was that Crockett's entire life had prepared her for his interruptions. The chamber felt tense, like a coiled spring. Miller thought he was chipping away at her composure, but the opposite was true. He was walking straight into her arena. He was setting the stage for the very line that would freeze him in place. And soon, the seventh interruption would come, and with it, the turning point no one saw coming. The chamber was already tense when Stephen Miller leaned forward, his voice sharp enough to cut across the microphone. This was the first interruption. He didn't wait for Jasmine Crockett to finish her sentence, he cut in, waving his hand dismissively as if to swat away her words before they even had a chance to land. The room shifted uneasily. Crockett paused, not out of hesitation, but out of calculation. She let him finish, let him drain the air with bluster, then calmly resumed her point, her tone even, her eyes locked forward. It was a warning shot, one that Miller ignored. The second interruption came almost immediately. Crockett had barely framed her argument when Miller's voice surged again, louder, more insistent, as though sheer volume could override logic. Whispers rippled along the back benches. Some heads turned. The tension was building, not because anyone was surprised, Miller was known for this tactic, but because Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice, didn't bite. Instead, she let him reveal his impatience, exposing himself as a man unwilling to listen. By the third interruption, the atmosphere in the chamber had shifted. A low murmur swept through the audience, journalists leaning forward, pens tapping, eyes narrowing. Miller leaned into the microphone, talking over Crockett's words, trying to drown her out. But Crockett didn't snap back. She didn't scramble. She simply paused, her silence cutting deeper than any rebuttal. When she finally resumed, her words landed with double the weight, measured, deliberate, unstoppable. It was then that some observers began to realize Miller was not winning this exchange. He was unraveling it. The fourth interruption carried a different energy. It wasn't just louder, it was more desperate. Miller's voice cracked slightly, as if frustration was beginning to bleed into his performance. He gestured with his hand, leaning forward so far it seemed he might leave his seat entirely. Crockett remained composed, her body still, her expression unwavering. To those watching closely, it was obvious, his attempts to destabilize her were only highlighting her control. The contrast couldn't have been sharper, one man flailing, one woman in command. When the fifth interruption hit, the murmurs had become audible frustration. Even some of Miller's usual allies shifted in their seats, their discomfort betraying what the cameras couldn't miss. Interrupting once could be dismissed as passion. Twice, as insistence. But 5 times? By now, it was clear, this wasn't debate. This was desperation. Crockett, still calm, let him burn his energy before speaking again, her voice unwavering, carrying an edge of authority that cut through the chaos like a blade. The room was with her now, whether Miller realized it or not. The sixth interruption was almost theatrical. Miller's voice rose to a near shout, his words spilling over Crockett's in a chaotic stream. The sound echoed through the chamber, bouncing off marble and wood, but something was different this time. The audience didn't lean toward him, they leaned away. It was too much. Too loud. Too forced. His attempt to dominate had crossed into self-sabotage. Crockett didn't raise her tone. She didn't match his volume. Instead, she did what she had been doing all along, she waited. She let him talk himself out, his arrogance filling the silence he thought he was controlling. By now, the chamber was thick with tension. You could feel it in the air, the way people shifted in their chairs, the way side conversations broke out in whispers. It wasn't just about Miller and Crockett anymore. It was about what this represented. A powerful man, interrupting. A woman of color, holding her ground. The symbolism was undeniable, and everyone knew it. And then, with the chamber hanging in that fragile balance, the moment everyone had been waiting for arrived. The seventh interruption. The one that would change everything. Because this time, Miller wasn't just silencing her, he was stepping into the trap she had been patiently building all along. And when Crockett finally delivered her response, the entire room would fall into a silence so deep, it felt like the nation itself was holding its breath. A silence that echoed far beyond those walls. A silence that became unforgettable. The chamber had reached its breaking point. 6 times Stephen Miller had interrupted Jasmine Crockett, and 6 times she had endured him with a composure that felt almost unreal. But now, on the 7th interruption, the moment everyone in that room, and soon the entire country, would remember forever had arrived. Miller leaned forward again, his face tight with frustration. His voice boomed, filling the air with the same hollow certainty he had wielded his entire career. He jabbed his finger toward Crockett, talking at her, not with her, his words stacking like a pile of bricks meant to wall her off from being heard. But this time, Crockett did something different. She didn't wait for him to finish. She didn't yield the floor, didn't allow him the satisfaction of speaking unchecked. Instead, she straightened her posture, lifted her chin just enough to command the room's attention, and then, she froze. Not in fear. Not in hesitation. But in control. Her silence wasn't passive. It was deliberate. Her eyes locked on Miller's, unblinking, unshaken. The chamber grew still, almost unnaturally so. You could hear the faint scratching of a pen stop mid-note. The clicking of a staffer's keyboard fell quiet. Even the low hum of the air conditioning seemed to fade under the weight of that pause. Then she leaned ever so slightly toward the microphone, her voice dropping into a calm, measured tone that cut through the tension like a scalpel. "Mr. Miller," she said, her lips curling into the faintest trace of a smile, "if interruptions were facts, you'd be the most truthful man in America. But they aren't. And you're not." A gasp rolled through the chamber like a wave. The words landed sharp, precise, impossible to misinterpret. Crockett didn't flinch, didn't hurry. She let the line breathe, her silence after it just as powerful as the words themselves. Miller opened his mouth, instinctively ready to fire back, but nothing came. His voice faltered before it could form. For the first time that day, his dominance shattered, his certainty crumbled. He sat there, his jaw stiff, his eyes darting around as if searching for an ally who could save him from the moment. Crockett continued, her tone unwavering. "You've interrupted me 6 times today. 6 times you tried to silence not just my words, but the people I represent. And yet, every time you did, you only proved what we already knew, that your fear of truth is louder than your respect for it." The gallery erupted in quiet murmurs. Some nodded sharply, others exchanged wide-eyed looks. A young staffer at the back covered her mouth in disbelief, while a journalist scribbled furiously, knowing he had just witnessed the headline of the day. Miller shifted in his seat, his face flushing. He gripped the table in front of him as though anchoring himself. But Crockett didn't let up. Her voice rose, not in anger, but in authority, controlled and steady, each syllable deliberate. Interruptions don't erase reality. They don't rewrite history. And they don't change the fact that this chamber, this nation, and this conversation will move forward, whether you approve or not. There was no shouting. No theatrics. Just truth. And truth, spoken with clarity, can be louder than any scream. The silence afterward was deafening. Miller's usual arsenal, sarcasm, aggression, deflection, failed him. His lips pressed into a tight line. He stared down, avoiding her gaze, as if the floor itself might offer him an escape. Around the room, reactions multiplied. A senator leaned back in his chair, lips pursed in acknowledgement of the checkmate he'd just witnessed. A congressional aide whispered, "Oh my God," to the person beside her. And near the edge of the chamber, someone shook their head slowly, mouthing a single word, "savage." Then, as if on cue, Crockett leaned back, her expression calm, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She didn't need to say more. She knew. The room knew. Miller knew. The shutdown was complete. But the moment didn't stay confined to those four walls. Within seconds, journalists in the chamber had clipped the line, tweeting it with captions like, "Jasmine Crockett just ended Stephen Miller in the Senate chamber." This wasn't a debate. This was a demolition. Screenshots of her words began circulating online, plastered across feeds in bold white text on black backgrounds. "If interruptions were facts, you'd be the most truthful man in America." But they aren't. And you're not. On TikTok, edits appeared almost instantly, slow zooms on her face as she delivered the line, dramatic cuts to Miller's stunned silence, reaction clips of users mouthing YESSS into their cameras. One creator looped her words over a beat drop, the video racking up thousands of shares in hours. Cable news ran the clip on repeat, panelists dissecting her tone, her timing, her control. Commentators described it as a masterclass in composure and the moment Miller's tactics finally collapsed. In living rooms across the country, viewers watched, replayed, and shared. Some cheered out loud. Others texted friends, "Did you see Crockett shut down Miller?" Even those who disagreed with her politics couldn't deny what they had witnessed. It wasn't just a retort. It was a shift. A reclamation of the floor. A moment where interruption was defeated not with anger, but with precision. Back in the chamber, the weight of the silence lingered long after Crockett's words. Miller leaned back slowly, his bluster gone, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. He didn't interrupt again. He couldn't. The fight had drained out of him, replaced by something he rarely showed in public, hesitation. Crockett, on the other hand, sat tall, her presence radiating something larger than victory. It wasn't just about shutting down a man who tried to silence her. It was about what that shutdown represented. For women who had been talked over in boardrooms. For people of color dismissed in classrooms and offices. For truth-tellers drowned out by louder voices. In that moment, Crockett wasn't just defending herself. She was defending them. And the chamber felt it. The country felt it. The internet amplified it. The seventh interruption had backfired. The silence that followed became historic. The mic drop wasn't just her line, it was her poise, her timing, her refusal to be shaken. And as the cameras captured Miller's stunned face beside Crockett's calm resolve, the narrative was already being written. This wasn't Miller's moment. It was Jasmine Crockett's. The silence in that chamber didn't end when the gavel tapped. It spread outward like a wave, crashing against the walls of the Capitol and spilling into every corner of the digital world. Within minutes, the clip was online. Within an hour, it was everywhere. By nightfall, hashtags were ablaze, hashtag Crockett7th and hashtag Miller Silence surged into the global trending charts, their momentum unstoppable. On Twitter, the first reaction was raw disbelief. "Did that just happen?" one user wrote, attaching the clip of Crockett leaning forward, her words sharp as glass and twice as cutting. Another added, "This wasn't a debate, this was a masterclass." Soon, celebrities chimed in. A-list actors, singers, and athletes retweeted the moment, praising her for standing firm. One pop icon posted, "That's what it looks like when truth finally shouts louder than arrogance." Tens of thousands echoed the sentiment. Cable news anchors scrambled. On primetime broadcasts, the footage ran on loop, commentators dissecting every pause, every eyebrow raise, every syllable. Pundits on the left hailed Crockett as the voice of reason under fire. Pundits on the right, even some of Miller's usual allies, struggled to defend his unraveling. "He overplayed his hand," one analyst admitted. "She was unshakable, and he lost control of the room." But it wasn't just political insiders. On TikTok, creators stitched the clip into parodies, slow-motion edits, and reaction videos. Some replayed Miller's interruptions 6 times, fast-forwarded, then froze on the 7th, the instant Crockett's words landed like a hammer. The caption under one viral video read, "6 interruptions. 1 obliteration." It racked up millions of views overnight. Ordinary Americans weighed in. Teachers wrote about how Crockett's composure gave them courage to keep speaking even when dismissed. Immigrants shared stories of being cut off, silenced, or overlooked, and how watching her shut Miller down felt like vindication. For the first time, one user posted, "I saw myself in that chamber." The replies flooded with heart emojis, fists raised, and cries of solidarity. The energy spilled offline, too. On campuses, students played the clip on projectors during political discussions. At family dinner tables, parents told their kids about the congresswoman who refused to bow to arrogance. In coffee shops and community centers, people whispered about the symbolic weight, a black woman standing her ground against a man who had spent years engineering policies designed to erase voices like hers. It wasn't just a feel-good moment. It was a spark. Think pieces poured out of newspapers and online magazines, framing Crockett's clapback as part of a larger struggle, the fight for who gets to speak, who gets heard, and who gets shut down. Scholars compared it to historic moments of resistance on the Senate floor. Activists called it a reminder that power shifts not just in elections, but in seconds of courage caught on camera. And Miller? For once, his silence spoke louder than his words. He had built a career on dominating airspace, controlling the microphone, bending narratives to his will. But here, in the court of public opinion, he had been outplayed. His legacy as the interrupter-in-chief now carried an asterisk, the night Jasmine Crockett made him stop cold. The shockwaves didn't end in the media cycle. Fundraising pages supporting Crockett's work saw a surge of donations. Grassroots organizations used the moment as a rallying cry. They tried to silence us 6 times, one flyer read. On the 7th, we spoke so loud the nation heard. In the end, this wasn't just another viral clip. It was a reminder that the politics of interruption, of talking over, of cutting down, of drowning out voices, is a fragile weapon. Because when wielded too often, it exposes its wielder. Miller's arrogance had backfired, and Crockett's resilience had turned interruption into ignition. And yet, beneath the viral joy, there was something deeper, a warning. For every Miller who tries to control the microphone, there is a Crockett waiting, patient, prepared, and unshakable. The nation now knew her 7th line. The question was, who would dare interrupt her again? When the dust settled and the headlines faded into their inevitable cycle, one thing remained etched in memory: Jasmine Crockett didn't just win an exchange. She reframed an attack into a universal truth. Her 7th line, calm yet piercing, wasn't merely a rebuttal to Stephen Miller's arrogance. It was a declaration, a reminder that interruptions, no matter how loud or frequent, cannot outlast the weight of truth delivered with dignity. 6 times he tried to cut her down. 6 times he raised his voice above hers. And yet, when the seventh came, it wasn't force that prevailed, but poise. That is the lesson. Arrogance feeds on chaos, but calm truth dismantles it brick by brick. Crockett's victory was not just rhetorical, it was symbolic. She showed that power is not in the interruption, but in the response. Not in the noise, but in the clarity that follows. For women who have been told to quiet down, for minorities who have been cut off in boardrooms and classrooms, for every truth-teller drowned out by arrogance, this moment was vindication. Crockett stood as proof that interruptions can rattle, but they cannot erase. They can delay, but they cannot destroy. When patience meets preparedness, arrogance collapses under its own weight. It was, in many ways, democracy distilled into a single-chamber exchange. Democracy is not perfect, it is loud, messy, full of interruptions. But when it works, when voices like Crockett's cut through, it reminds us that dignity is not weakness. Dignity is power. It is the calm in the storm that reveals the storm's fragility. And here lies the broader moral: truth does not need to shout. It does not need to interrupt. It waits, it stands, it endures, and when spoken with conviction, it forces silence upon those who mistake volume for victory. Crockett's seventh response echoed beyond that room because it wasn't just about Miller. It was about all who believe they can drown out inconvenient truths with arrogance. It was about every person who has tried to bulldoze their way through reason. It was about the timeless struggle between respect and contempt, democracy and demagoguery. Her triumph reminded us that respect is not given, it is earned, and arrogance never earns it. It reminded us that democracy's survival depends not on who can interrupt the most, but on who can stand unbroken when interrupted. And it reminded us that in the end, the loudest person in the room is not always the most powerful. This is why the clip spread so fast. It was more than entertainment, it was a parable. The story of a woman who, with composure and courage, proved that silence can be forced not by a gavel, not by authority, but by truth itself. The inspirational crescendo is clear: truth over noise, respect over arrogance, democracy over demagoguery. That is what Crockett embodied. And that is what millions heard, felt, and carried forward. So the next time someone tries to interrupt, in politics, in a workplace, in a family argument, Crockett's moment serves as a reminder. Do not confuse interruption with strength. Do not mistake arrogance for authority. Because dignity, once spoken, has the power to silence all noise. And as the echoes of that seventh line fade into history, the moral remains: interruptions may sting, arrogance may roar, but calm truth will always stand taller, unshaken, unbroken, undeniable. 6 interruptions. One final line. And in that instant, the nation saw who really held the power. What began as chaos, Miller's voice cutting across, determined to dominate, ended in silence. Not the silence of defeat, but the silence of realization. A reminder that arrogance may roar, but it cannot outlast resilience. Crockett's seventh response was more than a clapback. It was a symbol. A testament to the strength of calm composure in the face of relentless disruption. For every person who has ever been talked over, shut down, or dismissed, this moment rang like a bell. Interruptions don't decide outcomes, resilience does. And that is why this story matters. It wasn't just about 2 individuals in a chamber. It was about something bigger: democracy, respect, and the timeless power of truth spoken with dignity. Crockett didn't just win an exchange. She reminded us that interruptions crumble when they collide with authenticity. That when arrogance meets patience, patience wins. Every single time. So here's the call: if you believe in courage under fire, if you believe that dignity always deserves the last word, then share this story. Share it with those who need reminding that calm truth is stronger than loud arrogance. Share it with those who have been silenced, so they know silence can be broken. And if you want more moments like this, moments that prove power is not in the interruption, but in the response, subscribe. Because this is not the last time dignity will win. It never is. 6 interruptions. One final line. And the truth stood taller than the noise.